Well, good morning. How are y'all doing this morning? Well, thanks for being here and thanks for having me. So, as you know, I got set free from government, as I like to say. But I'm glad to be here to talk to y'all about election law. Now, this presentation may not, I don't go so much over the process, but I want to make sure you're educated on the election law. And you can share this information with your other Republicans, but also you're going to be sharing a location with the Democrats. Do not hesitate to share the law with them too, because the important thing is that everyone understands the law and everyone follows the law, right? So if anybody has any questions, feel free to give them my number and call me. It doesn't matter what party they are or whether or not they're just a voter. Well, I don't know if you want to give my name to everybody, but you know, if someone has a question about election law, please have them call me. This is my number, and it's in your presentation. Now, on election day, you can give this number a call if you have a legal question. You are also, I'm sure, encouraged to call downtown. Alan Vera, I believe, wants to have his number added. Is that right, Donna?
Yes, and that number.
713-253-6560.
Yeah, I can. If you guys can hear me, Alan Vera's number is 713-253-6569.
713
253
253 6569. Now, is there any other numbers that you want to share, Paul? Or is that good enough?
That's probably good enough.
Okay, that's good enough.
What was his last name?
That's Alan Vera, V-E-R-A. Okay. Yeah, he's on the Ballot Security Committee. He's doing a lot of work. He, Paul, Donna, and Arthur are doing a yeoman's job keeping everybody in line and following the law. I've been actually working with them as well behind the scenes, trying to make sure that they are following the law. And I mean, one of the big things was last November, they were planning on putting the information on the intranet, which is accessible by the internet. That got stopped. I mean, that's one of the biggest things, but there's constant little battles, as Paul alluded to, that Donna and Arthur are fighting. Okay, so our mission is to serve over 2.3 million registered voters. We're the second largest election entity in the nation. You want to provide each voter with the opportunity to vote independently and without influence and anonymously. For those of you who've attended my training, this is very similar, but I've streamlined it down, so we'll go quicker. All right, next slide. This election, it's a Democratic and Republican Party primaries. It's a presidential election. There's countywide polling, which means that during early voting as well as election day, any voter can go to any poll and vote. For this election, because it's required by law for countywide voting, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have to be in the same location. You don't have to have the same, you're not sharing the same equipment, but you have to be in the same location. Okay, next slide.
Not in the same room.
Not, well, it may be. I mean, if you're in a gym, it could be the same room. But it could be one group gets the library and another one gets the hallway. And yes, ma'am.
Is this the same for election day and early voting?
We're talking about election day. I assume are there any early voting clerks in the room? Okay. Oh, a lot of you. Okay. So this is mostly geared towards election day. If you have an early voting question, ask me. Okay? All right. So straight party ticket. A lot of people always ask about that during primaries. There is no straight party ticket in primaries because it's just one party. But you do get that question. But as of this year, in November, there will not be any more straight party ticket in Texas. Emphasis voting. This is something that we've had a problem in the past. We worked on fixing it, or coming up with a fix for it in, I guess, in 2018. I don't know what they're doing regarding coding that, but what happens is when someone votes, let's just say you are voting for the president. Well, let's pick a race that's contested, but let's just say you've got Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and you really want Mickey Mouse to do it. So you select him, it clicks on it, you come down and click on it, and then you click it again, and you really want, because you really want to make sure that everyone knows that you're voting for Mickey Mouse. Well, you've now deselected that, okay? So it's real important to tell all your voters when they come up that they need to look at the summary page at the end to make sure all their votes are correct. If they get upset saying, well, it changed, I said, well, then go back and fix it, you know, but it's real important you look at the summary to make sure it's correct. Another situation would happen is if they, and I had a hard time doing it, but some other people could do it well, is if they click and spin at the same time, it ends up hitting somebody else that they don't want. So part of the primary training, primary election is to train people how to vote for the presidential in November. So the more you can educate your voters on taking their time, don't do it quickly, and make sure you look at the summary page, that's really important.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The very first electoral training, what popped in my mind when you said that you're voting in the same location, but in separate locations within the location. And the problem I've incurred in the last 25 years is that the greeters or the language speakers, if you don't understand what they're telling people, and when they ask them if they're the same person to be the greeters, for both the Republican and Democrat, the language people were thrown to the party that they're voting for, not to the Republican Party or Democrat.
Okay, the question, or the statement is, there.
I understood like a name, that a candidate name that was like an independent, and, I don't understand Vietnamese and Chinese. I do Spanish, and that's where I'm having problems with the readers, that are language people, interpreters. I wish that they had a separate position and not do those people.
Well, you're in control of your poll, so if you don't want foreign language speakers being your greeter, then you put somebody else there and have your foreign language.
So we should have two different greeters, one for Democrat and one for Republican.
Yes, you're going to have your own
Okay,
staff
experience.
for your own poll. Now, it's going to be different in November. Yes, Paul?
There will be signs. Donna can tell you how many be handed out. There will be signs saying Republicans this way and Democrats that way, so should be helpful too. They can post those signs around the building.
And you should have something on your table saying Republican Party. Yes?
Yes, Sonia, the beauty of your training in the past, and what I love, is you had people hold questions to the end and get through the material. The reason is a lot of us have sacrificed very busy schedules to be here. So is there any way we can get through the material and hold the questions? Because it really adds time and...
I'll be happy to do that, and I will stay here as long as you want to answer questions.
Thank you very much.
So let's hold questions to the end. And thank you for the compliment. All right, so I'm not sure if you're aware of all the offices to be voted, but it's a president and vice president, which is every 4 years, the Texas senator, which is every 6 years, U.S. representative every 2 years, railroad commissioner, Texas Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, Texas State Senator, which is every 6 years, State Representative every 2 years, and then a whole bunch of others. In the county, you're going to have the county attorney, the DA, county judges, not the county judge, but county courts of law, sheriff, tax assessor, there's one JP, I believe, out there, and the party chair. And you'll have party propositions. Okay, next. Cybersecurity, the equipment, as I stated in the past, cannot be hacked by the Russians, okay? We're good. The results cannot be. Now, the voter roll could be, but it's backed up multiple times and by different entities. The tax office has a copy, the county clerk has a copy, and the vendor has a copy, so that's good. And the e-poll books are not connected to the voting machines. That's why you have the scanning gun to scan the information. All right, next slide. Positions in the poll, you've got presiding judge, alternate judge, and clerks. Next slide. Requirements for election, you need to, you report to the Harris County Elections Office. You must be a qualified voter, no elected officials, candidates, employees, relatives, campaign managers, campaign treasurers, or persons convicted of election offense. If you are on the ballot, so that when someone walks into your poll and your name's on the ballot, you cannot be an officer in that poll. And now that we have countywide, you can't be an officer, period. Okay. So the jobs in the poll are greeter, e-poll book, and JVC operator, assistant, and judge. Your duties are to pick up the equipment and supplies, staff the polls, operate the polls, close the polls, and deliver the poll paperwork, e-poll book, and JVCs at the drop-off location on election night. Your responsibility is to preserve the order and prevent breaches of the peace and violations of this code in the polling place and when in the non-electioneering area on election day. Everyone knows what the non-electioneering area is, right? The 100 feet from the door of the building. So if the polls were over here behind the door, it'd be 100 feet from the building, not from this door over here. Okay, next slide. Guns in the polls, they're allowed by the judge. Highly recommend you don't bring one. It just causes consternation and chaos, but you are entitled to bring it. Peace officers as well. You need to staff your polls with bilingual clerks. You can have volunteer clerks, student clerks, and we always request that you don't have everybody from the same family because Uncle Fred's in the hospital and everyone wants to be by his bedside and then there's nobody to run the poll. Mindset. You need to have your why. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this to be a part of the political process? You want to support your neighborhood? You're doing it to get a paycheck. Whatever it is, make sure you're doing it with vigor and that you're doing it to help the community and help the process and do the right thing. You're not there to make sure that your favorite candidate gets elected. You can do that outside the poll, but not inside the poll. You're a leader, so you need to train your clerks. You need to show your clerks how to treat other voters. Be detailed in your paperwork, and you want to dress the part. You are a judge, so dress the part as a judge. You want to enjoy yourself and have fun. This should not be stressful. This should be a pleasant time. You get to see all your friends and neighbors. Be knowledgeable about the details, and you want to make sure the voter votes as independently as possible. You are there to serve the customer, which is your voters. Next slide. So the polling location selection process is, there's some requirements by law. And when Stan and I were in office, we were being sued by the Department of Justice. And we were fighting a settlement, and as soon as the Democrats got in, they settled. So that's why you're having all these requirements to attend ADA training, why you have the doorbells. Kind of cracks me up. The doorbells have limited range, so sometimes you have to put them in the middle of the sidewalk between the actual driveway and where the pole is, which renders them useless. I thought they were dumb anyway. That's my opinion. I can say that now. Anyway, but we were working hard to make sure all the polls were ADA compliant. You need to have parking, allows electioneering. I have a little bit of concern that there's only going to be 400 polls and everyone's going to be showing up at the same locations. We've had problems in the past with too many people trying to vote at once. So I would tell all your friends, encourage them to vote early. Because I see a tidal wave coming. And I don't know if y'all remember, the Democrats had a huge turnout and huge lines on, was it 2016? I don't remember. Yeah, it was. And that was, the reason for that one was the Republicans had their last debate like the Wednesday or Thursday of the last week of early voting, so people hadn't really made up their minds, so they waited till election day to vote. And then the Democrats were pretty much not interested until Hillary showed up and had a rally in Houston like Tuesday of the last day of early voting, so people waited till election day again to vote. So Yeah, it was a mess. But anyway, I don't know what's going to happen regarding timing. Just encourage people to go vote early. You want to set your stage for success? Contact the polling location. So now the Democrats are going to be calling them as well. So I don't know if you know who the other judge is going to be and want to do a coordinated effort, but just know that they're going to call and say, well, I've already talked to somebody about that. I said, well, you talked to the other party, not me. So you want to make arrangements, get to know your contact, be courteous, your guest in their facility, be familiar with the location where the disabled area is. We've had in the past some polls that thought, well, everything's kind of crazy today anyway, let's just go ahead and throw a fire drill in here because this will be fun. Okay. Ask them to not do that, okay? And if you can, pick up the signs afterwards. It just helps relationships with those polling locations. Next slide. For Election Day, you're going to set up 2 lines of e-slates, a dowel at the end of each line. You want to create good flow. Next slide.
What's a dowel?
The dowel, okay, so this is your JVC. This is an e-slate. The dowel is a little bit lower. It's a disabled access unit. And the disabled access unit allows disabled folks to come use it. They have headphones on there. They have jelly switches. They can do the sip and puff. And it's a little bit lower. You always want that at the end. That's also the one that you're going to be using for curbside voting. All right, next slide. So you want to create good flow. Is there anybody who's a brand new judge in here? Okay. And so is there anybody who has not attended the e-slate training? Okay, so you don't necessarily know what those machines were that I just talked about. So there's a JVC, which I call the brain. It's connected to the voting booth. So this is the brain, and then you connect it to these booths. And you have 2 brains, and you want to set up good flow, and we'll go to the next slide, which shows you how you want to set that up. Next slide. So here you have people coming in the poll, and you're going to have 2 tables. One is going to have a JVC and an e-slate, and an e-poll book, and then the same thing over here. You're going to have e-slate, e-slate dowel, e-slate, e-slate dowel. Now, every poll is going to have a different number of equipment. You may have an odd number. If you have an odd number, just split it as evenly as possible. You have to have an area wide enough to accommodate a wheelchair. It may be, now, this would be a beautiful spot for election. Some of the locations that you have are not beautiful. They're kind of cattywampus, and it's difficult to put in the equipment. So to the best that you can, make it sure that it's wide enough for the wheelchairs to get through, and that people standing in line are not looking over the shoulders of people who are voting. Next slide. You're going to be setting up some postings. There's going to be an envelope that has all the postings in there and how to set them up. Next slide. Here's some of the postings. You've got van accessible parking, voter information poster, voter complaint poster, notice of voting order priority, notice of prohibited device, signs with stakes, voting here today signs, directional arrows, and notice to voters with disabilities. Next slide. On election day, you're going to have to put a count out every 2 hours as to how many people have voted at the polls. So that's going to be outside the polling room. You want to make sure that you're accurate with your count. We had a situation, I believe it was in December. It's either November or December, but one of the polls didn't keep it correct, and all of a sudden, the second, say like at 11:30, it was 250, and then at 1:30, it was only 200. It's like, well, how did we go down? So it was because they transposed the numbers when they wrote it down. So make sure that you're putting it down right, because it comes back to bite you later because everyone's upset, and how'd you lose the votes, or why was there a sudden jump from 9:30 to 11:30, which is not a busy time. So make sure you do it correctly. Next slide. You want to arrive at 6 a.m. Everyone's going to take the oath and put on a name tag. Next slide. You're going to have a travel box seal log. I think they call it something else now. But basically, it's a chain of custody document, and you're going to fill in the information about the JBC. You used to be able to print a zero tape. I don't believe you can do that anymore. So, what you want to do is basically fill out all the information that you can and make sure it's correct. Okay, next slide. Your distance markers are how many feet from the front door? 100. Perfect. All right, so you're supposed to measure that out. How do you measure that out? You can get a piece of string and do 10 feet at a time and then walk it out there. You can eyeball it. The poles are supposed to allow people to be able to electioneer outside that 100-foot area. If the 100-foot area is going to be out in the street, you can accommodate a little bit and put maybe just right on the perimeter, allow people in there. It's up to your discretion. You're the judge. You just don't want them within. If you had a whole bunch of area, don't allow them inside the 100-foot area. And there's some polls that it's just not going to be feasible to have the electioneering at that area. But if you have a question, call me or call downtown. All right, next slide. Oh, and it's illegal for someone to post any electioneering material inside of that. So let's just say there's a picture of the president in the school, right in the area where people are waiting to vote. That needs to come down. Even if it was, yeah. So there's a new requirement from this last legislative session that you have to post for all countywide polls, the nearest polling location, the 4 nearest polling locations by driving distance. Hopefully the county clerk's office has provided you with that information, but you'll need to post that out there so people know where to go. Next slide. You need to make sure you have your contact information. You want to dress business casual, wear comfortable shoes. You're going to be there for 15 hours, so you need to make sure you have food, snacks, plenty of water, your medications. Next slide. Polls open at 7 a.m. They have to open up at 7 a.m. If only half your poll is ready to go, that's okay, just as long as voters are able to vote at 7 a.m. It is really bad if you're not opening up at 7 a.m. There may be some voters who, even though they've had 2 weeks of early voting, the only time they can vote is 7 a.m. at that poll on election day. So it is essential that you're up and running. Next slide. So who's allowed in the polling area? Basically voters, presiding and alternate judges and clerks, poll watchers, they have to have an identification tag, Secretary of State inspectors, interpreters providing assistance to voters, children under 18 with eligible parent, peace officers appointed by the PJ, persons providing assistance to the voter, federal observers, county clerk and staff, and during the primary only, the party chair can come in and hang out and see what's going on. So Paul can go into any poll and check on you.
Paul, you're welcome to come to my location.
You have coffee?
Now, that doesn't mean that the Democrats can come in and hang out at your poll, and likewise, Paul cannot go hang out at the Democrat polls. So I'll let this one question go. Yeah, ask me later. Or ask me, if y'all stay for questions, there's probably some good questions that everybody wants to hear, but we'll get going quickly. All right, next slide. So who's not allowed in the polls? If they weren't on that list before, then they're not allowed in. There should be only one person at the voting booth. It's a Class C misdemeanor for a candidate to be present in a polling place during voting unless they're either voting, they're assisting a voter, or they have official business in the building. So let's just say a poll was here, and Paul, this is his office, he can come walking in. Well, he's allowed anyway, but let's just say this was not the Republican Party, but it was just a regular business, and Paul happened to have his office here. He could go on in, but he couldn't really hang out and loiter outside. Next slide. You can appoint a peace officer, but they have to be certified by the state of Texas. Next slide. You want to watch for electioneering. It is a Class C misdemeanor if a person loiters or electioneers within 100 feet of the opening of the polling location. So what does that mean? Well, no t-shirts, hats. You can't wear the Make America Great hat again. You can't have the I'm with her t-shirts. nothing that indicates a party or a candidate. There is a lawsuit going on right now to stop that. So you may have heard about that. It hasn't been stopped in Texas. Still, we require that you cannot be wearing anything that would influence voters in the polls. That doesn't mean that voters can't bring in materials with them. So when they're outside, they're getting barraged by a bunch of people and they have a stack of information, they're allowed to bring that in, just as long as they're not like plastering it on their head and or got a big poster and walking in with it. They can't do that. If they have a t-shirt on, they need to either turn it inside out or put a jacket on over it. It's a Class C misdemeanor if there's a sound amplification truck or operating within 1,000 feet of the polls. So we've had that in the past where a candidate was on a pre-recorded radio commentary and then parked his vehicle in the parking lot and then turned on the radio so everyone could hear about how wonderful he was. We also had one during early voting where a candidate had a rally in a park that was next to an early voting polling location, which was okay, until they turned on the karaoke machine and started talking about how wonderful she was. So that had to be turned off. Talking politics in the polls, even during a primary, is electioneering. So I don't care what it is, who's in the room. You may be unintentionally influencing somebody. So keep the subject matters to your favorite muffin recipes, dogs versus cats. You can talk sports, but not politics in the polls on election day. Next slide. Or during early voting either. Poll watchers are appointed to observe the conduct of election on behalf of either a candidate, political party, or a proponent or opponent of a proposition. There's a poll watcher guide, so you can learn what they're allowed to do. That should be in your supplies, but you can go online and get a copy of that. And I have the link at the end of the slides there.
Do they have to identify themselves?
The one, I'll get to the next slide. Let's see. Next slide. Okay, the poll watcher is registered. They have to be a registered voter in Harris County. No election convictions. You don't really care about this because you're not going to be checking on it. Next slide. They're going to walk in with a form that looks very similar to this. It's going to say, and I don't know that you're going to have poll watchers in this election. I'm educating you for November as well, so this is just good education to have. But it will have on there who appointed them and their name and their address, and they will assign it. They're going to sign it again in front of you, and you're supposed to compare those signatures and make sure it's the same person that was appointed to be at your poll. So they will sign that in front of you, and then you keep that document. All right, next slide. Poll watchers cannot assist in the polls. So if you are, at the end of the day, they're still standing there, you can't get them to help you break down the equipment. They are there to observe, and that's good for you and for them. Let's just say you said, here, will you help me carry this, and something happens to it, and then you blame them, and it just gets to be messed up. So they're just there to watch. They're not allowed to talk to voters, and they may talk to clerks until you tell them to only talk to you. I recommend that you tell them to only talk to you, that they don't bother the clerks about elections. Now, if it's a break, they can be talking to them, of course, about their favorite muffin recipe. But next slide. If they're not accepted for service, if for some reason you reject them because it's not, signatures don't match, or the candidate is not a candidate in the election, whatever the case may be, you return that certificate of service to them and state why you're rejecting them. Next slide. They are entitled to take breaks, go out, make a phone call, go to the restroom, go get a little snack. But if they're leaving for any significant amount of time, they're supposed to be there for 5 hours before you can say you can't come back. So they're there, they're at 7 a.m. and they're there till 10, and then they leave for an hour and a half and then come back. You can reject them from coming back into the poll. They need to be there for 5 hours before leaving the facility for a significant amount of time. Next slide. They may observe any activity by sitting or standing conveniently near the election officers being observed. Okay, they're entitled, there's a I did training for one of the candidates in the December election. And we had this issue that some of the judges were not allowing them in until the polls open. Poll watchers are allowed to be there as soon as the judge is there and activity begins in the polls until the end of the evening when they close. And so it's in two sections of the poll watcher's guide. Next slide. It is a Class A misdemeanor for a poll worker to prevent an authorized poll watcher from observing an activity the poll watcher is entitled to watch. So you need to make sure that they can see and hear. You can't tell them they can stand outside in the parking lot and watch who's coming in. That's inappropriate. However, they cannot be, if you have clerks and they're watching what's going on, they can't be hovering over and disturbing the ability of the clerk to do their job. So they need to let them do their job, but they should not be getting in the way of you doing your job or your voters being able to vote. Next slide. So media, they can be allowed in exit posters. They can be allowed within the 100-foot area. They are not allowed in the polling area. They can conduct non-disruptive exit polling, but they should not have any camera footage of the voting room with people in it. You can do fake stuff before the polls open, so you could have some of your clerks standing at the booth so they could get a photo of that, but they cannot be taking photos of people actually voting. You determine whether or not the actions of the exit pollsters are disruptive or not. I would suggest you contact the county clerk's office and let them know that the media's there or that they have exit pollsters. Hopefully, if they are aware of exit pollsters being out there, they'll notify you in advance. Next slide. So, no cell phones are allowed in the polls by the voters. And actually, they're not supposed to be within a 100-foot area, so they're not really supposed to have them standing in line. There's an exception if there's election equipment or an election officer is using it to conduct official work for the election. So you or your clerks cannot be playing video games on your phones, okay? Or your laptop or your tablet or whatever it is. Someone who's, if you've got a school and there's a teacher walking through with their cell phone or kids walking through their cell phone, that's allowed. But it's basically people who are there to vote. Now, there's a few exceptions that you may want to consider. You're the judge, you make the call. From what I've been told, there's sometimes a parent will show up and they've got a 4-year-old, and it's to everybody's best interest if the 4-year-old's quiet and they're sitting by mom while she's voting and they're on the cell phone. The whole point of it is so that people, A, don't record what is being voted on, and also don't record what is being said, or don't record how people are voting. There's another situation. Some people who have disabilities are dependent upon their cell phone to do translations or somehow convert the information to them so they can actually operate. To the extent that they're doing that, you're going to have to make a call as to whether or not that's appropriate. But for the most part, nobody's supposed to be using cell phones. You don't want your clerks using it, because you're also going to upset your voters if you're using your cell phone and they don't understand why they can't if you are doing it yourself. The next slide. So the voting process in general, you greet the voter, you qualify and generate the access code, and the voter goes to vote at the e-slate or down. Next slide. So the greeter's job is very important. They're supposed to be continually checking outside for curbside voters. Even though we have a doorbell now, they're still supposed to be doing that. They're supposed to be telling the voters to turn off their cell phones and let them know that, and I would have them say, you are here in line for the Republican Party to vote. You know, if you're a Democrat, go to the other room. So the greeter is also required by the resolution of a lawsuit to say this very long line. Typically, your greeter is probably your least technical person, so it seems kind of odd to me that lawyers came up with this very long thing for your least technical person. But they're supposed to say, so let's just all say it together for fun. Voters possessing a photo ID should have it ready, and voters not possessing a photo ID and not reasonably able to obtain one should have a supporting document ready in order to execute a reasonable impediment declaration. Easy, huh? So, the greeter should be going, what happened in the past, they would say, have your driver's license ready. Guess what? 90% of the people have a driver's license. They're not really allowed to say that. They should just say, please have your identification ready. And they should be educated on what, if someone has a question, well, I have, my gym card, they should be able to explain to them that that's not appropriate. But we're going to get into that. Next slide, please. So steps for qualifying the voter. You're going to check their identification, find the voter's name in the e-poll book and compare, look for special designation in the e-poll book, verify the address, voter signs the e-poll book, and generation of the access code, and scan the e-poll book. All right, so this is Stan's creation. Woohoo! He and a team basically invented the program, and he personally designed the stand out there. It's Stan's stand. So when the voter comes in, there's a number of steps that go through, and the training that the county clerk's office is giving you now is mostly procedural, doesn't get to the nitty gritty of what the law is. I have a problem with that in that you don't know where the line is. So that's why you're here. So I'm not going over so much the process, but some of it I will. But basically, the voter comes in, they've gone through the check-in process, and then they can sign. So this is what it looks like when they can sign. Next slide, please. Then what's going to happen is the barcode is going to flip back over, and a barcode is going to pop up. You're going to take the scanning gun that's attached to the JBC, scan it, scan that barcode. Next slide, please. And it's going to generate an access code on the JBC. You're going to take that off, and then hand that to the voter. Next slide, please. So voters are required to use a photo ID if they possess one of the 7 photo IDs. If they don't have one of those 7 photo IDs, they can bring other options and sign a declaration that there is a reasonable impediment to obtaining the photo ID. Next slide, please. So you want to check the identification. The question is supposed to be, do you possess one of the acceptable forms of photo ID on list A that is either current or not expired more than 4 years? Voter says yes, the voter has to use their photo ID. So if they say, yes, I've got a driver's license, but I'm going to use my voter cert. No, they have to use, by law, they have to use the photo ID. Next slide. Okay, so they have the photo ID, but it's not with them. It's in their car, or it's in my wallet, which is in my back pocket, which I don't want to pull out for you. They have to use it. If it's at the restaurant that they went to last night and they forgot it, they need to go back and get it. If it's 5 o'clock on election day and they may not make it, they can vote provisionally and then cure it later, and we'll get into that process. But they are still supposed to use it if they have possession of it. Possession is still, even though it's at a restaurant, they still have possession and control over it. If they left it at their parents' house in Montana, they can't go and get it, so they'll have to do a writ in that situation. Next slide, please. So if the voter does not possess a photo ID, then you should ask the voter if they cannot obtain one on the list, and they say yes, then they may present a supporting form of ID on list B and complete a reasonable impediment declaration, or RID, and I will say RID from here on out because that's too much to say. And they vote regularly, they don't vote provisionally. If the voter does not have a RID, or reasonable impediment, and did not bring a supporting form of ID, they may vote provisionally, and then they can go cure it later. And they have 6 days to do that. The next slide, please. So the acceptable forms of ID are your driver's license, the state identification card, the election identification card, handgun license, a military ID, passport, and your naturalization documentation. It has to be original. They can't show you their cell phone with a copy of their driver's license. That does not work. They have to have the original document with them. Only the Texas driver's license can be scanned with the e-poll book. Everything else has to be manually entered. So if you scan it and it's an Oklahoma driver's license, it won't work. Or if it's a Texas handgun license, it won't work.
The voter ID.
The voter ID will, yes. Okay, the voter ID and the driver's license will work. Okay, next slide. So it's acceptable if it's not been expired for more than 4 years as of the date that they're showing up to vote. For people over the age of 70, we got this passed. For people over the age of 70, it basically doesn't expire. So if you've got somebody who's 85 years old and they've got a driver's license that expired 3 years ago, you can still use that ID. The next slide. I'm sorry, expired 5 years ago, they can still use it. And there are also some other cards that don't expire. Your Texas identification cards for people over the age of 60. Texas election identification certificates for people over the age 70. Some military IDs are permanent and they'll be marked indef, which means indefinitely. And then certificates of naturalization and certificates of citizenship don't expire. Next slide. So you're familiar with these. You've got the driver's license, your identification card, your election certificate, and your concealed handgun. Well, it's either concealed handgun, or most of them now just say handgun license. Or license to carry, okay. Next slide. Yeah, license to carry, you're absolutely right. And then this is under 21. Next slide. So if it's not valid, you'll get this error message. It says it's not a valid one, so which means you need to put it in manually. Next slide. If you go and update your driver's license, you will get a temporary card, which is usually an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with your color photo or maybe black and white photo on it. That is acceptable and it's good for 4 years for election purposes. I would not use it for driving purposes, but it's good for 4 years for elections. Next slide. Next slide. This is your military license. It doesn't matter which branch. We had one judge who apparently was Army and he didn't like Navy, and so someone showed up with a Navy one and said, no, that doesn't count. So, well, there you go. So we'll have to have 6. You're correct. Next slide. So there's more military ID cards here. There's also the veteran health ID cards. Those are acceptable as well. Next slide. Your passport. Now there's also a passport card that people can use to go across the border regularly. That is acceptable. The global access card, where you can get on the plane quicker, whatnot, that doesn't count. It's just your passport or that passport card. And then, of course, your naturalization documents. Next slide.
Before you go to these, would you also explain the voter registration exemption? There's still 6 people in Harris County.
We're going to get to that. Yeah. List B, if the voter does not possess an ID from List A and the voter cannot obtain an ID from List A due to reasonable impediment, they may present one of the following IDs and execute the writ. Next slide. So the 7 are your voter registration certificate, certified birth certificate, current utility bill, bank statement, government check, paycheck, or government document with voter's name and address. So next slide. Next slide. So the voter registration certificate, this is, I think there's, what color are they now? Orange. Okay, so they're now orange. I need to update this. So they must be valid for this election. So you need to check the date and make sure it is correct. Next slide. Birth certificate, it does not have to be a Texas birth certificate. They can be born other places, so that's allowed. But it has to be a certified copy. Next slide. Current utility bill, that means within, I believe, 2 months. And it has to have the voter's name and their address on it. So if it's Bob Smith and John Doe, and Bob Smith shows up to vote and it's John Doe's utility bill, because that's who's paying for it, that doesn't work. It has to have their name and their address on it. Next slide. Bank statement or check. Next slide. Other government documents. The voter's name and address need to be on the documentation. And it must be issued by the federal government or a state or local government in the U.S. So their gym badge with their name and their photo does not count. It has to be issued by the federal government. And it also has to have their address on it. So when I worked for the county, I had a badge, it had my name, it had my number, and it had an address on it. But it had the address of the building. Now, I basically lived there, so it would have been okay, I think. But other than that, for most people, that's not correct. So you can't use that. Examples of government documents: driver's license from other states, ID issued by federally recognized Native American tribes, DPS receipts without a photo, expired voter registration certificates, expired DPS issued driver's license, or personal identification cards. Next slide. Okay, these are ones that don't count. Your Social Security card does not have your address on it. State college IDs, they're not going to have the voter's name on, their address on it. It's going to have, University of Texas, Sonya Aston, but it's not going to have an address. State and federal ID cards, if no address, like what I was talking about with my county ID. Library cards, no address. Twix cards, no address. And global entry card, no address. So do not compare the address on the ID presented on list A to B to the address in the poll book. It is not, in order to accept the ID, it is not essential that those addresses match. This is for accepting the ID. We do talk about the address later on, but to accept the ID, it's not essential. Okay, next slide. The reasonable impediment declaration. Having an out-of-state driver's license is not an impediment. If they claim, why don't you have a driver's photo ID? Well, because I have an Oklahoma driver's license. Okay? That is not stopping you from getting a reasonable impediment. That's not a reasonable impediment. That's going to be with your students mostly. They're going to have to come up with something else. Be sure to fill in the type of identification provided by the voter. And so you want to fill in this form to identify why this person, the information is in there. Next slide. So here are the reasons of that they can have. Lack of transportation, family responsibilities, lost or stolen photo ID, no birth certificate or other documents needed to obtain photo ID, photo ID applied for but not received, disability, illness, and then work schedule. You notice out-of-state driver's license is not on there. Next slide. So you're going to fill out this portion here at the bottom. Next slide. You cannot question or challenge the voter regarding their lack of List A identification. So if you're at let's just say we had, this was a voting room, and you're sitting right here. You can see everyone drive up. See someone drive up, get out of the car, come in, out of the driver's seat, come in here and come vote. And they say, I don't have a driver's license. You're like, but you just drove. You have to have a driver's license to drive, right? You can't say anything about it. You just gotta let it go. Next slide. Then on there, they're going to say they can't vote, they can't get a photo ID because they don't have transportation. And you go, you just got out of a car. What are you talking about? Can't say that. You can do it all you want in your head, but you can't say it out loud. So they can go ahead and check lack of transportation. Next slide. If the voter says, no, they don't have a reasonable impediment, basically I'm too lazy to go get one, then they have to vote provisionally. Or if they don't have the ID, they have a reasonable impediment, but they don't have one of the other 7 forms of ID that are allowed, they can vote provisionally. The voter has 6 days to cure after Election Day. Now, what they do to cure is they go to one of the tax assessor collector's offices and they show the proper form of ID, and then that will cure their ballot. Anybody here on the ballot board? Okay. There was an issue that I was going to share with you, but you don't need to know about. So anyway, they have 6 days to go and cure. You want to go ahead and identify who is a RID voter on the e-poll book. Next slide. So the exceptions of photo ID. So people voting by mail don't have to have photo ID. There are some people with a disability and they have a permanent exemption. And we'll talk about that in a minute. religious reasons, someone won't have their photo ID, they have to go sign an affidavit, they have to go vote provisionally, cure it, and by going to the tax assessor's office and signing an affidavit saying, I have a religious exemption, and then natural disaster. For instance, during Harvey, a lot of people lost their identification, so they were able to sign an affidavit saying, I don't have ID. Next slide. So here, which is, I believe, what he was talking about here, there's going to be an E, which I believe is actually somehow got moved, but it's over here. And that E stands for exemption. Yeah, there it goes. That's where it belongs. So basically, people who are disabled can get a permanent exemption, and all they have to do is show up with that voter cert, and it'll have an E on it. I believe you're saying now that there's a total of 6 people in Harris County, so it's kind of like bingo. If you get one, that's exciting, because there's only 6 in the entire county. So that's what it would look like up there.
I have a question. Did you ask them to vote provisionally?
No, these people get to vote regularly.
Okay, right.
Yes, these people vote regularly. Next slide, please. Didn't we already say this, or maybe I just hadn't taken on an extra slide? So we've already covered this. Next slide, please. Okay, we went over the cure process. They have 6 days to do it, and they have to go to the voter registrars. Next slide. Okay, good. So now the voter, you're going to find the voter's name and compare. The clerk looks for the voter's name. If the name is not in the e-poll book, they should contact the voter registrar and find out that they're supposed to be there. If yes, they're supposed to be in there, then hopefully that can be updated electronically at that time. If for some reason it's not able to be updated at that time, they can add the voter's name to the omissions list. I did not see it listed on the training for the county clerk's documentation, but it should be in there. You should not have more than 1 person on the omissions list. That is a big problem. So if the voter registrar says, no, Sonya Aston is not registered in this county, she is not entitled to vote in this election, and I say, absolutely, I am, I registered, I don't know what they're talking about, then vote that person provisionally. Next slide. So if the voter provides a voter certificate along with their photo ID, then they vote regularly. Oh, okay, here's what the situation is. Let's just say you've got a voter who came in, and they're a bit of a vagabond. They move, change apartments every 3 months. And every time they move, they get a new voter registration card. So they've got all these cards that are actually valid because there's not magic ink that disappears once you move, right? So they could show up with a card and their ID, and of course the addresses don't have to match. And they can say, I'm here to vote in this poll. And with countywide voting, it's not really so much an issue anymore. But you still want to call down to the voter registrar's office, and because they're wanting to select a certain ballot. And here is an issue that showed up last election. We had a voter, and Donna shared this one with me, that had moved from Kingwood over to Cy-Fair. So they showed up at Cy-Fair and said, I want to vote in the Cy-Fair election, though they're still registered in Kingwood. They're not entitled to do that. And they demanded that they be able to vote. So the person voted them provisionally, which is actually what they're supposed to do. Unfortunately, that vote was counted and shouldn't have, and so that's something we need to correct. But it's important that even though they're registered to vote somewhere else and they show up in your poll, you need to make sure you have that they have the valid certificate for where they're supposed to be voting, where they want to be voting. And you can do that by calling down to the tax office and find out which one is the correct certificate. Next slide. Here's the omissions list. Again, you only want to do 1 person, or maybe 2 at the most. Next slide. One thing we haven't talked about, the e-poll books. And I haven't been in the office for a year, So I don't know what they've done to correct it, but there is always a connectivity issue. So let's just say your e-poll book should work whether or not it's connected to the internet, but it won't be receiving updates. So if for some reason someone came in and said, I'm supposed to be voting here, and you call down the county clerk's office and they say, yes, you should be voting there, and they try to update it, it may not be able to be updated because there's a connectivity issue. So I just want you to be aware that that may happen. So in that case, you're going to have to vote somebody provisionally if you can't get them updated correctly. So the next thing you're going to do is find the voter's name. You are going to need to determine whether the name in the poll book is exact, similar, or too different to accept as similar. For instance, my name is Sonya Lily Aston. My voter registration says Sonya Lily Aston, and so does my photo ID. So they're exact. But if one said Sonya L. Aston, and the other one just said Sonya Lily Aston, they're similar, but they're not exact. So you're going to have them sign an affidavit, which they just initial, that that is a similar name. If they're too different to accept as similar, so if I show up and I say I'm Sonya Lily Aston, but the only name that pops up is Sandra Laura Ashton, and I say, well, that's me, and it's the same address, that's not the same person. That is too different to accept as similar. So basically, I have not shown up with proper ID, and I need to vote provisional. Next slide. You want to look for a special designation. When looking up the voter, there may be one of several designations by their name. It should say SOR required, ID required, voted early in person, mail ballot requested, sent to the voter, received, or already voted. So let's look at the SOR required. Next slide. Oh, well, I guess we're doing voted early in person. So voted early in person, that means that they showed up and voted already in person. There's been some times where we found out that for whatever reason, somebody showed up and they were given the wrong identification card. It would say it was like James Buckner and James Buchanan, and you'll see they can go back and look at early voting. James Buchanan actually showed up and voted for James Buckner because they were given the wrong slip. So it does happen that they have not voted. I did have a voter who called me, and he was very upset because he wasn't allowed to vote because he was told he voted early already. Well, he just didn't understand he had voted early because it was during the November election and the December election, I'm sorry, and I don't know if you recall, but we had early voting the day before Thanksgiving, and then we had some time off, and then it started up again. He voted the day before Thanksgiving. He didn't realize it was for the same election. So you could have some confusion where someone did already vote or maybe they haven't. So it just needs to be checked out downtown. Next slide. Mail ballot. Now, for some reason I must have taken out the slide that says SOR. So SOR is a statement of residence. And what that means is that either the county clerk or the tax office has sent these people some mail and it's bounced back as being the person not being there. So therefore, they're put on a suspense list, and they, after two federal elections, their name's going to be removed from the list. So they need to update their address. So they need to fill out a green sheet that says, it's basically a voter registration card that has all their information. So mail ballots. A voter may have requested a mail ballot, but for some reason they want to show up on election day and vote. They need to, this is for early voting, for election day. Early voting is a little bit different. So for election day, they need to surrender the mail ballot. Well, this works actually for early voting, but it's a little bit different process. They're going to fill out a cancel form, and then they're going to vote a regular ballot. When you receive the ballot, you need to make sure it's for this election. There's been a number of elections in the past, and they could have a ballot from a previous election. So make sure it's for the election for this election. Same thing's going to happen in May when you have the runoff election. They may have this election, so make sure it's correct. If they don't have the ballot on election day, they can only vote provisionally. Early voting is treated differently. Next slide, please. So there's some people who are not who are registered in the current election. Only people who are registered in the current election can be qualified. For this election, the entire county is eligible to vote in this election. But let's just say for the runoff, that there's not a countywide election. Some people may not actually be eligible to vote in the election. So they may show up to vote and they really want to vote, but they can't because none of their races are out there. So you need to, but they swear that they're supposed to call down to the tax office and verify with that. Next slide. You want to verify the address. Now, before we said you could not reject someone's ID because the addresses don't match. But here, at this step, you need to make sure that the address that they have matches what's in the poll book, because otherwise they need to update it with their correct information. And the whole reason is everyone's supposed to be voting where they reside. They're not supposed to leave their registration at their mother's house so that they can vote on their mother's best friend's husband who's running for whatever office. They're supposed to be registered where they live. So the clerk must ask the voter if the residence in the e-poll book is correct. If it's correct, then they should continue the process. Now, they should say, do you still live on Elm Street? Or do you still live at 123? They don't need to say, hey, do you still live at 123 Elm Street? Because they're basically announcing to the whole poll where that person lives, and some people like the privacy issues, so, just do either the number or the address. I've heard that some of the clerks say, was this address correct? Well, that's just too easy for the person to say, well, of course it is, what's on the ID. So, if they match, so you need to ask that anyway. If it's not correct, you need to ask the voter if they still reside in Harris County. If no, they've moved out of the county. The only option is to vote provisionally. So if they moved within the county, they need to go vote where they are registered. Next slide, please. If the voter so if they move within Harris County, the voter may vote only if the voter fills out an SOR. And they don't actually need to go back to their old poll because they're countywide voting here. All right. If they are outside of Harris County, if they moved outside of Harris County, for early voting, there's another process. They vote a limited ballot. Limited ballots are not available on Election Day. So then they're going to sign the e-poll book. The image on the screen will be flipped so you're going to tilt it over so they can sign it, and then they accept their signature and it flips back. Next slide. So you're going to scan that barcode, and under the barcode, notice it says precinct ballot style. This is very important, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So you scan that, and then the access code pops up. Next slide. So if you need to manually generate the ballot code, for some reason your printer's not working or something else is going on, you need to find this ballot style and go and find it in the JBC. So on the JBC, it's going to have all the ballot styles for the entire county. So the first one's not going to necessarily be there. So you need to go through and find that exact ballot style so the voter gets to vote on who they're supposed to be voting on. We had a number of issues in the November election when people showed up to vote and they weren't given the right ballot style. And they're like, I know that I'm in Mickey Mouse's district and I'm not getting Mickey Mouse on my ballot. So they're very upset, and they should be. They should be getting the correct ballot style. If they claim that they're not getting the correct ballot style, stop and look and see what's going on. Try to figure out what the problem is. One thing you can do is look up the voter and on Harris Votes and find out, look at their sample ballot and see if Mickey Mouse is supposed to be on their ballot. And also on the sample ballot should have their ballot style that they're supposed to be receiving. Next slide. Okay, we already talked about that. Next slide. Okay, if the voter makes a mistake.
Can I ask a question related to just that? So if there's a slight difference, like it says Barbara Lee Jones, and one of them has, like maybe the driver's license has Barbara L. There's an option that you can ask the person saying, do you want this to update, right? So that it will make those two consistent.
There is that option to update, yes.
Does it take the driver's license and update the voter, or does it take the voter call and change their driver's license?
Oh, it'll update from what the driver's license says. So the driver's license will, so that the voter roll will now match the driver's
But
license.
that's not mandatory, they sign that.
No, it's not mandatory.
It's mandatory if it's a similar name, but it's not mandatory for the other.
Yeah, so, did everybody hear that in the back? Okay, there is an option when you're signing in that you can update your voter registration to be the same name as the identification that you show. And so you can initial that saying, yes, please update. The best thing to do is just have them fill out an SOR and it'll update for them. Okay, so if a voter is casting a ballot and they say that they made a mistake, as long as they haven't hit cast ballot, you can cancel the booth and fix it. And some of the mistakes, especially in the primary, will be, I'm in the wrong primary. Another one would be they selected the wrong language. They thought they were selecting English and they ended up with Vietnamese. So you can cancel that. If they've already hit cast ballot, it's over. They can't do anything about it. It's a done deal. Everybody only gets to vote one time. Next slide, please. If a voter's not eligible to vote, they should be informed of the opportunity to vote provisionally immediately. They don't have to vote provisionally, you just give them the opportunity to do that. You should never send somebody away without giving them that opportunity. And only the presiding judge and alternate judge should be handling the provisional ballots because they're the only ones who've been trained on it. Next slide. So this is a provisional ballot affidavit. The voter's going to fill out what's in yellow. You're going to fill out this section, and you're not going to touch this section. Next slide. So you're going to generate a provisional ballot stub from the JBC. So make sure that you're doing this correctly. What happens is when everyone votes regularly, there's two ways to vote, regularly and provisionally. So if you're voting regularly, what happens is your vote, you hit cast ballot and your vote goes in this big old bucket, huge sea of votes. If you vote provisionally, it's in a little bitty net, and they're collected. And what happens is, after the election, the early voting ballot board reviews all these affidavits and makes a determination whether or not to accept or reject that ballot. So if they say accept, then they're going to drop that little one out there. If for some reason they end up fighting about it later, they can pull it back up. And then so there's, at the end of the election, you're going to have a basket, a little net that still has some in it, and then some that have been dropped through. If you vote regularly and you drop your vote in the big C, there's no way to pull it back out. So if someone voted improperly regularly, there's no way to retrieve that ballot. So that's why it's really important to make sure you do this correctly, because it's actually criminal to let someone vote regularly who should be voting provisionally. So you're going to go to add a voter on JBC, select the proper ballot style, and then select provisional in the JBC, confirm by selecting yes, and then select print. This is all going to be in your training manual for the JBCs. Next slide. So you're going to issue a provisional ballot stub. The voter must print his or her name and sign the bottom of the provisional ballot stub. Then this stub's going to be longer. Normally your access code's about this big. This one's about this big. You're going to tear off the access code part of the provisional ballot and hand it to the voter to go vote. Next slide. So this is what it looks like. You're going to verify that the proper precinct and ballot style is on the voter provisional stub. They're going to put their name. And after recording the ballot code on the affidavit, so there's a ballot code right here, you need to put that on the affidavit. Then you're going to put that stub, it's a little bitty piece of paper in a great big envelope. And then hit next and it'll show you how you turn. Click. There you go. So that rips off the access code. Be sure to do that. We have found some, they're all intact. So you're wondering, how did the voter vote? That didn't make any sense. All right, next slide, please. So there are some things that you need to make sure you do. We've kind of gone over that. Next slide, please. So these are the things you need to identify why this person is voting provisionally. If you don't put that information in there, then the early voting ballot board cannot make a determination, or they have to guess, and then they may be guessing wrong. So you want to say that the person failed to present an acceptable form of identification. They're not on the list of registered voters. They're not on the list of registered voters. That's not going to really matter now with countywide voting. Okay, voter on list of people who voted early by mail and voter has not canceled mail ballot. And then voting after 7 p.m. due to a court order. That happened in 2018. The Democratic Party kept open 8 polls because they opened up late. About 2 of those polls actually opened about an hour late. One was an hour and a half late. Most of them were between 5 and 15 minutes. They should not have gotten an entire hour, or 2 hours, I think, is what they got to vote extra. We've changed law now so that if you keep one poll open, you have to keep all polls open. Yes. Yes. Which is, well, you'll probably be informed through the e-poll book. They'll send some sort of notification. Issue is connectivity. So,
So what about pay? You're only limited to 14 hours.
no, they'll pay you more. They'll pay you more. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the pay. So, and then voter on list, but registered outside the precinct, and then other. Other can be for DPS. Let's go to the next slide. So DPS issues. Sometimes people go and change their driver's license, and then they check, register me to vote, and for whatever reason, DPS doesn't follow through. And so what they can do is, on the driver's license, there's an issue date. So you want to get that issue date on the driver's license, put it here, DPS issue, and then the early voting ballot board will go look it up and see whether or not that person did actually check the box and see if you, and sometimes they are go ahead and are allowed to be counted. Next slide.
There's a glitch on that. If you go back to that slide with all the little squares, one more back,
One more back, yes.
you cannot click other by itself. There's always gonna be another box up there that says click, and I've reported this since the beginning, every election like whatever you clicked on before other, they both stay clicked. In other words, if one of them's gonna come up check, but you can't click on other by itself without one of the up top boxes being checked also.
Oh, okay, so
There's a glitch in it.
there's a,
Other by itself. And I'm thinking you open it up, there's one of them's going automatically.
okay, so in other words, when you click other, you're going to have to click another reason as well.
Yeah, you can't, yeah,
But what you can do is write on the affidavit what your issue is. So do that. All right. Next slide. Okay, so only ID voters can cure. If you have a mail ballot, you can't cure. Or if you voted after 7 p.m., you can't cure. Only ID voters can cure. All other provisional voters will be notified 30 days after the election whether or not their vote counted. The ID voters know their vote's going to count or not count by whether or not they showed up and provided ID. So they're not going to get a letter because, well, duh, they know one way or the other. Okay, next slide. You need to add the voter's name to the list of provisional voters. Next slide. Do not let provisional voters vote regularly. It's a Class B misdemeanor to permit an ineligible voter to vote except by provisional voting. Next slide. You're going to put them all in the provisional ballot envelope. These are live ballots. You want to keep them in a safe place. Next slide. So let's talk about illegal voting. If a voter votes or attempts to vote if they know that they are not eligible. If a voter votes or attempts to vote more than once in an election. If a voter votes or attempts to vote impersonating another person. If a voter knowingly marks or attempts to mark another person's ballot without consent. And to divulge someone else's vote. We had a judge in this party who got tricked into doing this. It's a felony. What ended up happening was a voter showed up with her 18-year-old child who was disabled, so the child needed assistance. So she was helping him, and she asked the judge to come over afterwards and said, "Look what my son did. Didn't he do a great job?" So he said, "Well, yeah, looks like he checked everything." It's like, "No, look what he did." He says, "Well, all the boxes seem to be checked. It looks good." He said, "No, how he voted." He said, well, if he's gonna vote on the bathtub thing, then da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so he basically announced to the entire poll how that young man voted. Okay? I was always wondering how you can divulge somebody else's vote. You know, how does that happen? That's how it happens. So don't let it happen because it's a felony. It's a big problem. Okay? Next slide. So I'm hesitant to whether to bring this up. I know I was in charge of poll watchers in the December election, and we had to move some of them around because we were just adjusting them. And we had one poll watcher who was shocked to see the same voter come in at one poll at another poll. He was at Fiesta, and then he was at Balin Park. The reason he knows, he recognized the face, and then the voter, not very bright, had these bright orange yellow shoes that everybody recognized, and of course, I mean, that anybody would recognize. So, but there wasn't really anything he could do about it. It happens. If you're aware of the situation, document it, because it is a felony, but it's going to be hard to prove. But there's a lot of naysayers out there that say this thing doesn't happen. If you're aware of the felony that's going on, but it's not something you can do something about, please still make a report. Let us know what's going on. And to the extent you can describe the person, let us know. You cannot take a picture of others. Well, we actually did get a law passed, but it hasn't been implemented yet. So the ability to do it by the county clerk is available, but let's keep questions to the end. So we can't really do that, take the photos, but you can write down the name. We had a situation where a woman came in to vote, I think it was in 2018, early, on election day, and she came in at 2:30, and she was told she'd already voted. She says, I did not vote. I am not going to let this happen. She threw a big fit and, got all upset, and they allowed her to vote provisionally, and she was mad that she had to vote provisionally. She was really upset about it. Well, we went and looked at what happened was her daughter had voted early, and then her daughter showed up with her mother's driver's license and voted at 10:30 that morning. So she had actually already voted. So the woman's provisional ballot was counted, because it should be. It was her time to vote. But it was all turned over to the DA. I don't know what happened, but that's a felony. So things can happen. People can vote. What you are doing, and the reason I tell you these stories is because they're important, and though it may not seem like a big deal, let the old ladies vote regularly, whatever. It may not have been the situation, or that's how we were able to realize that this woman, his daughter, had actually voted for her. Okay. So these are misdemeanors. You cannot announce the number of votes that a candidate or measure has received. You're not going to know this anyway. You cannot announce who's ahead. You're not going to know this anyway. You cannot share the name of voters who have or have not voted. So you got your neighbor coming in. You say, hey, you need to go get Jim and Sarah. They haven't voted yet. Get them in here. No, that's illegal. It's a misdemeanor. Likewise, someone comes in, hey, have my sons Tom and Jerry showed up? You can't give them that information. Even though you know them and you know Tom and Jerry either have or haven't, Tom has, Jerry hasn't, you can't give that information out. Next slide. Assisting voters. You always want to give the voter the opportunity to be as independent as possible. Next slide. So there's a fairly new law, not so much anymore, but you can allow someone to cut in line if it looks like they need the assistance to cut in line. You need to be careful about that, because then everyone's going to claim, oh, I've got a bad hip, and they all want to cut in line. But you need to, you are given the latitude to allow them to do that now. Next slide. Next slide. Interpreter, voters who do not speak English. The voter may bring in their own interpreter. It can be anybody. It used to have to be somebody who was in this county, but now it can be anybody. They need to sign the interpreter's oath. Next slide. Next slide. So only certain people are entitled to assistance. Only people who cannot read, write, or see. They can't write, it means they can't operate the machine. If they can't read, it means they can't read the language of the ballot. So it could be they speak French, talk French, write French, but not English, Spanish, or Vietnamese or Chinese. So they're entitled to assistance. You also may have someone who's very fluent in English and but they can't read or write. They're illiterate. They're going to hide that from you, but they still do need assistance. And then someone who can't see, that's basically someone who is sight impaired. Next slide, please. If the voter speaks Spanish, Vietnamese, or Chinese, we have the language in all 4 languages on all the e-slates and dowels. So they can go use that. Also, at the end of the dowel, there are headphones that the person can listen to and hear what their ballot is. Next slide. If the assistant appears to be speaking for voters, always respond to the voters. So if I come in and say, I'm here to help Gail Stannard vote, talk to Gail Stannard, don't talk to me. She's the voter, not me, okay? And I just said that twice. Okay, next slide. When the voter comes in, okay, well, there's 2 instances I can talk about with the assistant coming in saying, I'm here to help Billy vote. I'm so excited. Billy is 18 years old. This is his first time vote. I'm so excited. Well, you ask Billy, do you need assistance? Billy says, no. No, Mom, I don't need assistance. You say, well, Billy, you don't need assistance. You can go vote by yourself. And he gets very excited because he can do this on his own. Being 18, for some people, may seem like to you is a disability, but it's not, okay? That is not one of the criteria. They can go vote by themselves. There's some other situations that come up, and we had this situation where it was at Tracy G. And a bus of 14 elderly people came out who spoke Vietnamese. And so this man was coming in, he was bringing these people in, and he was taking them over to vote. They weren't talking, and he was basically doing all the voting for them. Okay, that's a felony. Okay, that needs to stop. So when the voter comes in, and I say, I'm here to help Gail Stannard, Gail, you look at Gail Stannard. Sorry to pick on you, but
I'm leaving.
do you want assistance? If Gail's unable to say, I need assistance, then say, I'm sorry, but Miss Stannard has not indicated she needs assistance. So you go wheel Gail Stannard over in front of a booth and just let her sit there until he's ready to go, because he's tired of waiting for Gail Stannard to do nothing. It happens, and I know it's kind of harsh, because you don't know what to do, but these people are taking advantage of it's elder abuse, in my opinion, to be doing this, or disability abuse, to be wheeling these people in there and taking their vote. You also have the same thing where a mother comes in with her autistic child who doesn't know what day it is, much less who's on the ballot. And she says, I need to help Billy. Well, you're going to have to use your judicial discretion as to whether or not, you can ask Billy, do you need assistance? He says, oh, no, I'm fine. Well, Billy seems to be okay. Let Billy go by himself. And you're going to upset mother. You're also going to have another situation where I come in with my mother. She's got Alzheimer's. Now, in the morning, Mom was clear as a bell. We discussed how she was going to vote. We didn't agree on some things, but I knew how she wanted to vote. So we go to the poll at 1 o'clock. Not so clear now. It's election day. We don't have much option. So you're going to have to use your judicial discretion. You're going to ask Mom, do you need assistance? Mom, maybe. Use your judicial discretion, when it's a child helping their parent, that sort of thing. When it's clear that this person's just standing there doing nothing. Well, that may happen with the Alzheimer's patient. But the busload of people, get the name of the assistant, and don't let that happen, okay? Voter has 2 options. They can bring in their own assistant, but it can't be the employer or officer or agent of the employer or the voters union. Anyone else is able to serve, even a candidate. I said President Bush, I'm sorry. President Trump could come in here and assist people to vote. Doesn't matter. Next slide. Only the person rendering assistance is permitted to be with the, while the voter prepares his or her ballot. That is wrong. No, that is right. That is right. Sorry. That is right. The assistant must take the oath, and then their information must be captured. So here's another thing. Married couples will sometimes come to the booth or to the table to check in, and they're standing side by side. Now, what you would say, are you assisting Mr. Smith? And no, I'm voting separately. Well, then she needs to stand behind him, let him get checked in, and then you check in her. If she's standing beside him, you need to see if she's an assistant so she can sign the assistant documentation, because it's harder to get that assistant to come back and sign that they're assistant when they're already at the booth. So here's another recommendation too. In some marriages, there's one party who thinks they need to tell the other one what to do all the time. So sometimes it's better to put one spouse on one side and one spouse on the other, so they can't do that because they're supposed to be voting independently. If they need to take some time and go figure out how they're doing that, say, we're going to cancel your booth, go outside, figure out what you're going to do, and then come back in. But they're not supposed to be telling each other how to vote. Now, they can share, let's say they've decided that morning how they're going to vote, they have it all written down in documentation in just one copy. They can pass that back and forth, but they really shouldn't have somebody standing over there telling them what to do. You must ask the voter if they want the entire ballot read, and instruct the assistant to read the entire ballot. This is really key. We had a judge who called me one time. She was so upset because this was during early voting, and apparently one of the candidates had gone to, as she quite said, Skid Row, and got a bunch of people to come in and vote for this person. Well, the problem is these people were all illiterate, and they didn't know how to read. And so she was having to read the entire ballot, and of course it was during a primary. It was the 18th, in 2018. Well, it was taking forever. She said, Sonya, I've got this huge line, and all my people are wrapped up assisting people, and I can't get the voters through. I said, well, have you been asking them if they want the entire ballot read? Because basically Fred paid them to come in. They only know about Fred. They don't care about anybody else. So just ask them, do you want the entire ballot read? And they're like, no, I'm just here to vote for Fred. Well, she calls me back day like, oh my God, Sonya, this is wonderful. Because now the line's moving, and I'm just going and looking for Fred. Anyway, next slide. So you need to go ahead and make sure the assistant and the interpreter are added. Next slide. Okay, the other option is you can provide assistance. To the extent you can, you want 2 people assisting this voter. You don't have to take an oath because you already did first thing that morning. Next slide. The entire ballot must be read unless, again, I would ask, do you want the entire ballot read? At this point in time, poll watchers can come and inspect what you're doing, because they can't on the other one, but they can with what you're doing, because they need to make sure that you are doing what the voter requested, and and any translations that are going on. Now, let's just say you've got an assistant who is speaking Vietnamese. You don't understand Vietnamese, but you can, the poll watcher is still able to watch that and make sure that it goes through. But the Vietnamese person is supposed to translate to you what they're telling that person. And the poll watcher can inspect the ballot. Next slide.
Before it's cast.
Before it's cast, yes. Because you want to make sure, if I said I want to vote for Mickey Mouse and the person selected Minnie Mouse, you said, but they said Mickey Mouse and you selected Minnie Mouse. So you need to do it before it gets cast. So you want to keep your hands behind your back. You don't want to touch the screen, because when you're doing a lot of this, there's other people watching you. And it looks like you're telling the voter how to vote. So keep your hands to the extent you can. Now, that may be that they can't operate the machine and you have to do it for them. I mean, maybe do the first one and show them how to do it. And commercial, well, yes, if they're telling you to do it, you need to do it. But I would constantly encourage them, look, all you have to do is spin this dial and let them do that. But you should always have two people in there, so it's making sure that you're okay. Let's hold questions till the end.
Yeah, I'm just making a statement. When you do that, I'll also get the other person to confirm that it's what the person's asked for.
That's a good idea. Do not cast a ballot until the voter has repeated that they are finished voting and ready to cast their ballot. We had one voter, very slow, had a judge who was antsy for them to finish, and she said, okay, we're done, click, and the person, well, I wasn't ready. And of course, you know, they raised a big stink, they called downtown, it was a big issue. You just waited, asked one more time again, would have resolved a whole bunch of headaches, or prevented a whole bunch of headaches. Next slide. Curbside voting, this is for a voter who's physically unable to enter the polling place without assistance or likelihood of injury to his or her health. You can go have one person out there, the poll watcher can go with you. Do not go and give the machine to the voter and then leave. I heard about this, that someone just left the machine and then came back a little while later. Wait for the voter to finish and then bring it back in. So I had one judge tell me a funny story. He said he had one voter, and he wanted to know if this was appropriate. A voter came in and said they wanted to vote curbside because it was raining and she didn't want to ruin her hair. That is not physical injury. She has to come inside. So that excuse won't fly. So there are some excuses that you can say, I'm sorry, we can't accommodate that, because really it is a burden on your office to go out there and handle these curbside voters. But you want to take care of everybody as they should be. Next slide. So you're going to take the dowel. That's only the one at the very end. Don't take any other one. Just take the one at the very end. You must stay with the voter while they vote, and poll watchers may attend. Next slide. Okay. Disabled voters. Do not treat disabled voters as victims, suffering, incapable of burden, or as children. You want to recognize their abilities and not their disabilities. You want to give the voters as much independence as possible. Ask the voter how they would like to be assisted. So a lot of times people are nervous when they have someone with a certain disability and they don't know how to handle it. Well, just take a deep breath, calm down, and just say, how may I help you? How may I assist you? Please let me know. And they'll be happy to let you know for the most part. Next slide. A wheelchair, cane, or service animal is an extension of that person's body, so you don't want to touch it or move it without permission. Always address the voter and not their assistant, and be patient. Next slide. Unlawful assistance. Providing assistance to a voter who is not eligible for assistance while assisting a voter preparing the ballot in a way other than the way the voter directs or without direction from the voter. Next slide. While assisting a voter, suggesting by sign, word, or gesture how the voter should vote, or providing assistance to a voter who has not requested assistance or selected the person to assist the voter. So these are misdemeanors, but the felony that we talked about earlier is basically voting for somebody else. Next slide. Limited ballots are not an option on election day. Next slide.
What does that mean?
During early voting, if someone has moved out of the county, they can go vote in the new county, but only on the issues that are similar between them. So it'd be presidential, Supreme Court, senator, state, the federal senator, but they can't be voting on issues that are not similar between the two counties. And they have to do that in the new county. But that's not an option on election day. Have the voter complete the request to cancel application for ballot and sign. Next slide. So this is a fairly new form. We reworked it for the Secretary of State. All voters fill out the top section. If the voter has the ballot with them, you're going to fill out this section. If they don't have the ballot with them, then they're going to vote provisionally. This is for election day. Early voting, you can work the process where it cancels downtown. So this is for early voting use only, so early voting people will use this one, and you need to fill out this portion at the bottom. Next slide. If a voter does not have the ballot, you can provide the options to them. They can vote provisionally, or they can drive downtown, get their mail ballot canceled, get that receipt, and drive back out to any poll and vote. But they have to go downtown. Next slide. Canceled booth log. This is very important. We had a situation where a voter went in, and this is something I talked about earlier, and they got the wrong ballot. And they had talked to the candidate before they went in, who was standing out, campaigning outside. They go in, and they already checked, made sure that they were in the district. They go in, that person's not on their ballot. So they said, well, okay, they left the ballot standing there. Come outside, like, it says that you're not on my ballot. And they said, well, that's wrong, you know, and they looked it up again and said, look, this is where you're supposed to go in. They go back in, the clerk, or the judge had cast the ballot. Okay? So, first of all, never cast the ballot if nobody's standing there, because you're basically voting for somebody else, which is a felony, correct? And second of all, that person, they should have canceled it and said, you know, Sonya went outside. Sonya should have told the clerk that she was going outside. But they should have said, well, that was Sonya. She went outside and canceled the booth. Or, you know, left it open so that she could come back, but that's not really good either. They should have just canceled the booth so that she could come back in. But since they hit cast ballot, she can't vote again because it was cast for her. So, I don't know if I talk about that later, but anyway, real important not to do that. So you want to keep a canceled booth log. It's very important that you have why that person was canceled. So it may be that you all of a sudden looked up, there's not a waving flag, there's an open booth, and nobody around. So you're just going to have to cancel it and say, I don't know, they just vanished. I don't have any idea. If you see a voter, they're walking away, and the flag, because when you hit cast ballot, there's a blue flag, there's a blue screen with a flag waving on it. If they're walking away and that's not that way, you want to stop them and say, you have not hit cast ballot. And said, yeah, I know, I'm going to the restroom. And say, okay, well, let me know that so that I don't cancel your booth. But you need to handle it and make sure that, grab that person if they're out in the parking lot, go get them and bring them back in. And have them finish casting their ballot. You want to fill in the date, time, and name of the voter if available, and then it was canceled, and check the reason why it was canceled. Next slide. Next slide. If the voter accesses the booth and leaves without casting ballot, the booth must be canceled. Do not hit cast ballot. If possible, identify the voter. We've already talked about that. Next slide. So the voters, the flag should be waving. Okay, basically, really want to make sure you get this point, so we just did it again. Next slide. Closing the poll. So the the polls close at 7 p.m. So if anybody's standing in line at 7 p.m., they can vote. They must be allowed the opportunity to vote. When I was in the clerk's office, the time was 7 p.m. The best time to use is basically your cell phone. They're advocating a little bit more lenient record on that. I don't understand that. What's okay? 701, 702, 703? We had a situation where a couple came in screaming, and the wife was driving, dropped the husband off. He jumps in line 6:59. She goes and parks the car. It's now 7:02. They say, I'm sorry, the poll's closed. Well, there's a disagreement in the polls, and finally they let that person in. Well, now it's 7:07, and 3 more people showed up. And you're letting that person in, so now you're going to let these people in too. You have to, because you're letting this person in. So, for me, 7 o'clock's the deadline. You're in line at 7 o'clock. Now, if you have a little old lady and she's, coming like this, a little bit of grace there. But if it's a little old lady and she's just pulls into the parking lot and it's 7:01, no. You're the judge. Use your judicial discretion. Mine is, it's really easy, 7 o'clock. So if they're in line at 7 o'clock, then what you can do is have all the people enter the polling place. Another thing you could do is have one of your clerks stand at the end Another thing you can do is get slips of paper and say you have 30 people in line, hopefully not. Well, I mean, we want a big turnout, but you don't want to be there all day. So let's say you have 10 people in line. You have 10 slips of paper, and you give number 1 to the last person in line. 2, 3, 4, 5. So 10 is the first person that's coming up to you. So that when you get number 1, you know that's the end of the line. That's a nice way to handle it. The poll watcher should not participate in helping to close the poll. Next slide. So you're going to do reconciliation. You're going to look at your JBC and what your poll book says, and your numbers should match. But you're going to get, and these tapes are wrong now because you don't have 0 tapes anymore. But you're going to have a little report that comes out and says how many people voted. But it won't have everybody who voted on it. So you're going to fill out your JBC reconciliation page. Next slide. You're also then going to put the JBC back into the same box that it came out of, and you can tell that by there's codes on the side, serial numbers, so you can match them. And you want to fill out the information on the salmon-colored sheet of paper. Next slide. You should be sealing the JBC box with the green seal. Both judges should be doing this together. Next slide. Emergency plan. It's important to be prepared in case there's an emergency. We've had situations where a tornado knocked out a pole, or there's been a fire alarm, or there's been criminal activity and the pole's been in a lockdown. There's a number of issues that can go on. So you need to have designated a place to meet outside of the pole in the event of an emergency. There's certain things you need to grab. You need to grab the, well, first of all, you need to have someone who's going to direct out your voters safely. Next, you can have your poll watcher do that if you have a poll watcher. Next would be you want to have your JBCs and your e-poll books and your provisional ballots. Those 3 things should go with you if you can. If it's that dire of an emergency, save your neck, get out of the room. Okay, next slide. I think that may be the last slide. Okay, additional information. So there is training online with the Secretary of State, and it is texaspollworkertraining.com. And then there's a qualifying voters on election day handbook for election judges and clerks. And then there's a poll watcher's guide, and all that information is in your packet. Next slide. I think that may be it. That's it.